Hello everybody, Scott here again today, Cowboy Counselor. I've got the crazy hat on again today because that cold front is blowing in and it is windy outside and cold. I'm in the garage today because this is where all my leather making stuff is. And I do knife sheaths for all the knives that I make. This is a knife that I finished a couple of videos ago. That's how it came out. It's nothing special. It's just a really basic. It's either going to be a butcher knife or a kitchen knife or both, but I'll pack it around with me. And it came out pretty good. I might do a little bit of a knife sharpening thing on this later on. This is probably more indicative of just one of my basic sheaths. So this is a knife, it's all dusty and dirty. It's a deer-footed knife that I made. This would have been out of a deer that we harvested last year. Sinew wrapped handle, hand-forged blade out of plow sweep disc, I believe. And my knife sheaths, I like to use brass rivets, and the reason why is that way your blade will never cut. It'll never take that stitching out, or it'll never wear out. Some of the knives I've used, I've had them for 25 years. That's how long ago I made them, and they're still going strong, and the sheaths as well. So my lesson for today, I'm going to be doing a little bit of leather work with a lesson along with it. And the lesson is, this is a knife that I made this week. This is a custom blade. And I did this because a kid that I know from church, he's probably 7 years old, I had forgotten that I promised to make him a knife. The conversation probably went something like, will you make me a custom knife? And I said, sure, and then immediately forgot about it. So 2 months later, he packed this little blade in to church. It didn't have the handle on it yet because I did that, with a huge piece of antler to go with it, and said, here's my stuff, make me a knife. And I had to remember what he was even talking about. So the first thing I did is I went to his parents and said, are you aware that he packed a knife blade into church? And he's a farm kid. And by that I mean that when you grow up on a farm, you're usually afforded a lot more responsibility just because of the work involved. You're gonna carry a pocket knife because you need to cut hay bales. And this is a perfect size knife for that. You're probably gonna wind up driving equipment at a pretty young age and have to show some responsibility. So his parents were fine with it. And so I bought this home. I told him I had antler. I have a bunch of these little antler tips around that just made a perfect little handle for that. All I really did is I just notched it out far enough I could get the blade down in there, ran a steel pin through it, actually a nail, and then epoxied it in, cleaned it up a little bit, and now I'm gonna make him a little custom made sheath for it. So I'm gonna be going through this of kind of the simple process that I make sheaths like this out of. I think I'll make this into what would be a horizontal mount for a belt. So you would wear it on your belt in a horizontal fashion and then pull it out like this. Okay, first thing I'm going to do is I'm gonna punch a couple of holes. I wanna make sure it'll be a right side knife sheath. So if you're right-handed, you would pull it like this out. I'm left-handed and I still wear them this way because I tend to grab a knife left-handed and backwards. And actually, I'm ambidextrous, so I wear knives on both sides. This is not my favorite leather punch. I don't know where my good one is. I have a feeling I left it at work. I do some leather work with kids that I'm working with in counseling, and it's probably in my office. So I'm just gonna go ahead and I kind of know what I'm looking for here. So I'm gonna punch. I have to hit it from both sides because once again, this punch is not great. And I want it to be about that long enough for a belt to get through. Okay. Now I'm going to select a scrap of leather that I can go ahead and punch corresponding holes in to fit that, and then that will become the loop that the belt will run through. Okay, I just grabbed a little strip of leather out of my collection over there that I think will work pretty well for this. So I needed to clarify, this is actually a vertical mount, but by the time you run your belt through it and you rotate it forward off your belt, it becomes kind of like a 45 degree. So it's not truly sitting horizontally on your belt. Otherwise, as the sheath loosens up, gets old or whatever. I don't like to have a keeper strap on any of my sheaths because I hate having to unsnap it when I need it. So I just want it to ride at a 45-degree angle so my knife doesn't fall out. So I'm gonna go ahead and punch holes in this to correspond with what we've got. So if I gotta mark anything, I'm just gonna hold it on there and hit that from the back. 1. And 2. I like to use the knife that I'm making the sheath for to do some of the leather work with. I don't know why. It just feels like kind of a holistic process. So I'm gonna go ahead and punch that nail hole out of there a little bit. If I can find them, I'm gonna use a fairly heavy rivet to put this on our sheath. And the reason why is there is nothing worse than having your belt loop break on any knife and you lose your knife in the woods. Okay, I'm gonna trim the edges a little bit just so they're not that 90-degree angle that can snag on things. As I was saying before, you don't want your sheath loop to break and you drop your knife, because if it's a special knife, you're probably gonna have to go back up and look for it. I was up hunting one time, made a beautiful shot on just a really nice mule deer buck, probably from 200 yards away, and did everything right. He dropped. Hopefully you're not offended by hunting stories if you're on my page. And I walked all the way down there, and it was pretty rough country, so I had to go down a ravine and then back up to the other side. I have a buck knife that goes with me on every hunt because I've had it since I was 10 years old. It's a factory knife, but it started with me on the farm when I was a little kid back in Indiana, where I had no hope of hunting big game. I don't even think we had whitetail running around there in those days. And it's a very special knife to me, so it's the nostalgia, and that's why it goes with me. It was on my belt, and that dang loop broke. And when I got up to go work on that deer, that knife was gone. And before I did anything, even though dark was closing in, I was 3-4 miles back in. It was pretty extreme, and wintertime. I went all the way back up on that hillside till I found that dang knife, and then walked all the way back down and then started field dressing that buck and quartering it out so I could pack it out. I only got half of it out that night. I walked most of that in the pitch black, in the ice and snow, and the last 2 miles with only moonlight. Went back in the next day with my daughter. She helped me pack the rest of it out, so it ended up being a good hunt. Moral of the story is, put a really good strap on your knife sheaths so that they don't break. Hey, this is one of the best systems that I like to use for riveting something onto leather. I'm not gonna be able to get that one back off. So this is actually a copper rivet with a copper washer. I've used them a lot on saddle tack over the years on different things. So I'm gonna take the rivet part, I'm gonna come through the back of the knife sheath that's gonna be closed over, so it'll sit flat when your blade goes in. It won't snag up, and that copper's not gonna scratch up your knife blade. Now the washer is gonna go over the top, and the washer has to be hammered down. I don't know what happened to the original tool, but I'm using an air chuck because it actually has about the right configuration to slide over the top of that. I'm gonna use my railroad track anvil as the backing, and I'm just gonna hammer that down. Okay, now obviously I've got that huge stud sticking out. These are some old horseshoe nippers I have. I'm gonna use these to clip off the excess, like that. Okay, now I'm gonna take my hammer and I'm gonna mushroom it out, kind of flatten it. Okay, and that's on there. So I'm gonna go ahead and do one more.
Put that through there. They'll usually have these copper rivets at hardware stores. I'm pretty sure I didn't get these at a leather supply shop. Although I'm sure you can order them online. And hammer that down. Unless that leather tears, which I don't think it will, that is never going to come off of there.
Yeah, I'm gonna check my knife in the sheath one time before I finish off just to make sure I don't have any issues, but that's gonna be about what it looks like. I'm gonna use one more rivet right here because that's always a stress point for any knife sheath, because you're taking that in and out of there so many times. a lot of times if it's just stitched, that'll be what works loose on you. So I'm gonna go ahead and punch that out and put one more in, and then I'll decide how I'm gonna attach the rest of this.
I'm gonna punch a bunch of holes in here to run those through. I'm not gonna go a ton of them. Maybe, something this size, I'm just gonna eyeball it. I have marked these out before. I don't know that it's really necessary on the ones I'm kind of paying attention to what I'm doing.
Okay, there's what that looks like with a whole stretch of them in. I'm gonna punch one big hole down here in the bottom to run a leather lanyard through, just to hang off this sheath. Probably about right there near the end. This is a sheath that I made for what I would call a neck knife, so it actually hangs around your neck. I don't know where the knife is. That design is actually off some cave paintings that my guess would be are several hundred years old, if not even older, up in Wyoming. They're on a private ranch, but we call this symbol the Running Man. And I've used that symbol a time or two because it's one of the paintings that they had left behind on those dwellings up there on that ranch. And so I just thought that was a really neat emblem and enough that I wanted to emulate it. Might be a little better, see what that looks like. I'm going to take the knife out of there. Doesn't look too bad. Something that small. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to go ahead and cut. Slit through there. And then pass the other end through it. And then do that one more time, but I'm gonna go to the side that I didn't cut, and I'm gonna pass the other side through it. I'm gonna lay that on the anvil. We'll use the knife that I just did. Oops, actually got a little bit sideways there, okay. And now I'm gonna pass this side through that. It just looks cooler than knotting it off. So now with our knife in it, I think we're pretty much done. Might take it out to the grinder in the shop and just finish these edges. I don't think I'm gonna stain it. I like the color of that leather. It'll actually either ride like this on this side or has more of a straight up and down side, or maybe rotated forward a little bit. All right, my lesson for the day today before I got sidetracked was that when we learn to enjoy the things that we don't get paid for as much as the things that we do get paid for, we start seeing a little bit more balance in our lives. This knife, as I stated in the beginning, I made this for a kid at church because he had the gumption to bring that blade in and say that he wanted a knife made out of it. I did that for him, and it feels good. Sometimes I like donating my time and helping to enrich other people's lives. I also make a living. I enjoy getting paid for some of the things I do, but it has no longer become an absolute mandatory aspect of my life. So go out and do the things you enjoy. If you have an interest in leatherworking, this is pretty basic. I do a little bit more upscale stuff than this, but not much. A lot of my things are leather burned, or I do a little bit of hand tooling on some sheaths and things, but most of my stuff comes out fairly basic, fairly primitive, which is what this is. But I think this kid will like this knife, and I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you did, hit like and subscribe, and I will try to do some more. Thank you. Have a great day.